Crystal, I'm fascinated to talk about this next block because it's been massively viral, but the question is why?
Yeah.
The question is how organic the virality
I've been excited
is.
to talk to you about this one.
It's interesting for a lot of reasons. It's interesting on the sort of tech front, but it's also interesting on the kind of Gen Z, the new sort of discussion about how people see this country, how people see their role in the world. So if people haven't heard, obviously this blew up late last week, but Osama bin Laden's infamous letter to America that ended up on the internet in like 2002. Somehow someone got their hands on it. I think it was The Guardian that originally got their hands on it. 2002, it is going around the internet back in the day when it was a series of tubes, as Al Gore would have said. But was that Al Gore that said series of tubes, Crystal?
It sounds right.
It sounds
we'll go with
right.
it.
The series of tubes that made up the internet. But this letter started to make the rounds, everyone thought, on TikTok over the course of the last week. It turns out that's not exactly the case. So let's put the first element up on the screen here. So Yashar Ali, Crystal, I don't even know how to begin describing Yashar Ali. If you don't know about Yashar Ali, basically a prolific user of Twitter, prolific user of X, who has had quite an interesting background. You can Google it because there's no reason for us to dive into the particulars of all of it.
Yes.
Very friendly with Kathy Griffin, although not anymore. It's all up in the air. But Yashar Ali posts over the past 24 hours, thousands of TikToks at least have been posted where people share just how they read how they just read bin Laden's infamous quote letter to America, in which he explained why he attacked the United States. Now, one particular thing to keep in mind there with what I just read is he says thousands of TikToks at least. Okay, so then he continues and says, the TikToks are from people of all ages, races, ethnicities, and backgrounds. Many of them say that reading the letter has opened their eyes and they'll never see geopolitical matters the same way again. Many of them, and I've watched a lot, Yashar continues, say it has made them reevaluate their perspective on how what is often labeled as terrorism can be a legitimate form of resistance to hostile power. All right, let's put the next element up on the screen right here. This is actually going to be, this is from, if we put the next one up here, this is, oh, sorry, I was looking at the wrong block. This is going to be the video compilation of that Yashar posted of people saying they just read bin Laden's letter to America and have had their eyes opened up for the first time. So take a listen to what Yashar posted.
This morning I read Letter to America, which is Osama bin Laden's letter to America explaining why he attacked Americans. And I am ashamed to say that I not only have never read this letter, but I didn't even know this letter existed. And I feel the same exact way I felt when I was deconstructing Christianity. I feel a little bit just confused, like I have entered into another timeline. What is this?
So I just read A Letter to America, and I will never look at life the same. I will never look at this country the same. In the last 20 minutes, my entire viewpoint on the entire life I have believed and I have lived has changed.
It becomes apparent to me that the actions of 9/11 and those acts committed against the USA and its people were all just the buildup of our government failing other nations.
All right, so let's put up how Glenn reacted to The Guardian pulling the letter down off of their website. So Glenn Greenwald tweets, The Guardian's removal of the bin Laden letter from its site after 21 years until Americans started to read it completely backfired. The Washington Post says the removal actually spurred even more interest, and TikTok is now aggressively banning discussion of the letter. And that's the next element. We can just throw that up immediately. TikTok comes out and says, content promoting this letter clearly violates our rules on supporting any form of terrorism. We are proactively and aggressively removing this content and investigating how it got onto our platform. Well, Crystal, the Washington Post actually started investigating this and came to some interesting conclusions that tell us so much actually about social media and the news media. The fascinating kind of pipeline from, if people think of Covington Catholic, you have this snippet of a video that's going viral on Twitter at the time and suddenly ends up in the Washington Post and CNN, and people hadn't really taken the time to do their due diligence. They had just, these professional reporters making lots of money here in Washington, D.C. and New York, ran with these ridiculous stories. Well, that's actually kind of at the heart of this too, because it's a Streisand effect conversation in essence, which the Streisand effect is basically once you publicly complain about something, saying that it's getting too much attention, it'll get much more attention, that there may have not organically been that much attention on it in the first place. So if we put the next element up, Washington Post looked into the sort of source of the virality here and came to some, just fascinating conclusions, one of which was that if you look at the Google Trends, and this is the next element, there's a lot of stuff to go through here because the Washington Post found a lot of evidence here. This is Ryan Broderick. He runs a newsletter. He's saying, if you look at the Google Trends, he says, there are folks in my replies saying that Google Trends proves the bin Laden letter was already going viral before it was shared on Twitter/X. I marked below when it was tweeted. Yes, there was some interest. I never said there wasn't, but it was plateauing. After the tweet, the interest doubled. The Washington Post also talked about this Google Trends data, basically saying that TikTok did kind of make it viral, but that wasn't the whole story. And that's right. If you look at this, people had started Googling Osama bin Laden's letter to America, basically on this timeline, like roughly over the past few weeks. Then he's pinpointed right there. If you're watching this, you can see there's a little blue dot with a circle around it when the Yashar Ali tweet is posted, and it spikes right after that. So it's going up before and then spikes right after it. That would be the Streisand effect illustrated here pretty neatly, conveniently. So Crystal, there's also, as Sagar says in this next tweet, we can put Sagar up on the screen because even when he's not with us, he is always with us. Sagar says, if you're going to read the bin Laden letter and think it's somehow profound, you should probably read to the end as why he says there are no such thing as innocent American civilians and why 3,000 innocents deserve to die on 9/11. And I think the implication there, Crystal, is that it's also the argument kind of being rolled out by Israel, that there's no such thing as an innocent civilian in Gaza. We've heard people in the United States make that argument as well. And this is where the power of the bin Laden letter comes from. That, TikTok banning it, horrible idea. Horrible idea. As dumb as I think the people who are posting about it is, this is the dumbest idea ever because what you're doing is making it seem more forbidden. And the power of this history, if you read this letter, which is actually a very useful piece of historical context, if you read this letter, it is so powerful to you if you're a young American who doesn't remember 9/11, precisely because nobody has ever told you that this is what bin Laden thought. Precisely because nobody has ever told you this is how other people on the other side of the world see the United States. Glenn actually just did a really interesting interview on his show with David Talbot, who wrote Devil's Chessboard, about
great book.
All of these things the CIA has been doing in other countries, especially in the Middle East, that Americans don't know about, but that loom very large in places like Syria, in places like Iran, in places like Iraq, in places like Afghanistan. That's where the power comes in from the bin Laden letter. That's how that stuff goes viral.
So first, let me talk about some of the content of the TikToks, which we showed you a few of, and there were others. The ones that we showed, I actually have zero issue with because I think my sense of what people are reacting to and why they're like, oh my God, I feel like I've been lied to my whole life, is because what's sold to the American public is this very cartoonish, like, axis of evil, good versus evil. They hate us because we're free. Like, they just came out of nowhere and these are just bad people, or the culture's bad, or the religion's bad. It's just evil. There's nothing you can do about it. And there is an element of that. And if you read the letter too, by the way, there is a lot of it that is, there's like horrors in there and completely anti-Semitic and anti-gay and all this stuff.
That's the next element.
We can put that up on the screen. Emily actually flagged this, some of what he, objects to. We call you to be a people of manners, principles, honor, and purity, to reject the immoral acts of fornication, homosexuality, intoxicant, gambling, and trading with interest. But there are also things in there that are legitimate foreign policy grievances, which if you are going to be someone like bin Laden, who inspires this like horrific terrorist movement that took hold among some group of people, there has to be some core grievance that is actually real. And that's why people study, what enabled the rise of Hitler? What was Hitler saying about his own justifications? What were the social and political and economic conditions that led to the rise of Hitler and Nazism in Germany? It's not because they support Hitler or Nazism. It's because it's important to understand the conditions that led to this result. It's part of also, what people are talking about with understanding the history of Israel and Palestine that, leads to October 7th. It's not to say, oh, October 7th was justified and it was fine for them to attack civilians. It's, listen, if you cage a people and you have them in this open air prison for decades, yeah, you can expect that there's going to be some horrific, violent, dangerous results. So I actually fully support people reading the letter to America from bin Laden to have a deeper understanding of a horrific and traumatizing, in a lot of ways seminal moment in American history. To have it's important to understand what your adversaries and enemies are saying about why they do the things that they do. And it's also ironic to me, Emily, because we showed that thing from Soccer. We've probably mentioned Letter to America a number of times on this show.
It's you guys.
Exactly in this context.
It's you guys did this.
Yeah, it's our fault. Yeah, exactly. We sparked the viral trend. But exactly in this context of, okay, if you are going along with the Israeli officials who are like, all of the Palestinians are Nazis, Isaac Herzog, their supposedly like moderate president, saying we need to really rethink this this idea of innocent civilians. There's practically a quote that comes out every day that's basically like, no, they voted for Hamas, they support Hamas, therefore they're not innocent, therefore they deserve to die.
It's exactly what bin Laden says
That's
about
what bin Laden says about us. And by the way, bin Laden has more of a point with America because we are actually a democracy. We do actually elect their leadership. These people have not had an election for Hamas. Most of the population of the Gaza Strip wasn't even alive when they had their last election. All of this is horrific. None of it justifies attacks on innocent civilians. So it's important to understand that if you're going along with the Israelis when they're saying, yeah, there's no innocent civilians because, look, they like Hamas and they voted for Hamas, you are bolstering the very same argument that bin Laden made to massacre innocent civilians in America. And also, by the way, you are bolstering the very argument that Hamas would make about why there are no innocent Israelis and why it was perfectly fine and justified for Israeli civilians to be massacred on October 7th and in suicide attacks and other attacks and, firing rockets, et cetera, over the years. You should reject all of that. And so I actually think it's a good thing for people to be reading the letter. Now, let me also say, Emily, that there were also some of these TikToks that were like, bin Laden was right. No.
Nuts.
Bin Laden was not right. All right. No, absolutely not. But do I think they should be banned? Do I think TikTok should pull this down because of this, idiotic, facile and, immature and completely wrong take? No. I don't think they should have taken it down. I think it's absurd that The Guardian, something is popular on your website and that's like a red flag to you. Isn't that the whole reason you have things on your website is for people to find them and read them and engage with them? That's insane to me. And Glenn also made a good point because it's mostly the right that's like, these dumb Zoomer TikTok kids, like they love Hamas and they're evil and they hate America and now they love bin Laden, et cetera, which is just like a facile, preposterous reading of what's going on here. And also, we showed you the data of this wasn't even that much of a thing until it got called attention to and you had a bunch of people rocketing in to be like, oh, what do these dumb kids actually think? Yeah. But, up until very recently, there was this whole effort to release that school shooter manifesto that was being kept.
Audrey Hale.
That was being kept hidden. And the idea there wasn't, we want to read her writings because we support her massacre. No, it was, hey, we want to, it was kind of like we want to own the libs and the left and whatever, but it was like, we want to understand what radicalized this person. We want to read her words and her justification. And the very same principle applies here.
Yeah, again, like this is powerful because we don't tell this version of history. And I actually think that the right vastly underestimates how powerful this is with Generation Z and the kids that are going to be younger than them who don't remember 9/11. We're learning about 9/11 because the internet has democratized the way we tell stories about ourselves as a country. And there are really important elements of that story that we are not honest with ourselves about. There are, for example, Osama bin Laden, the Taliban, Al-Qaeda. We can go back to the Cold War and the Mujahideen and have these really serious conversations about nuclear war policy during the Cold War and how actually some of the things that we did from the perspective of a country that had just spilled blood overseas in the Pacific and had dropped a nuclear weapon for the first time ever, twice in Japan, why people were utterly terrified, why there were drills that people were hiding under their desks because they were so afraid of nuclear war, and how that led us to make some really ridiculous decisions overseas. But if we're not honest about those decisions, we are going to look like we are hiding that. And we are, to some extent, hiding it. And it's an amazing country that people like David Talbot can write the book that he did and can talk about it in the media, and that we can study these things and be honest about them. But until we sort of have a high-profile confrontation with those mistakes and what they did overseas, like, this is why the fight over the 1619 Project, we can go back to the Revolution or whatever, but like, we aren't even being honest about the history, the immediate history of conflicts that we are in right now.
Well, this is also why, we were opposed to like banning RT during the
100%
at the beginning of the Ukraine war, when Russia invades Ukraine, and all of these like Russian propaganda outlets were banned. Not because we think that they're accurate and perfect all the time, but because it's important to know what propaganda is your enemy putting out, how are they justifying this conflict, and what are also some like potentially legitimate grievances that they had that enabled their justification of this war and this conflict. Those are really important things to understand. So, and to your point, Emily, the big reason why we are so supportive of Israel since the 60s and so supportive of Saudi Arabia, and like these are our best buds in the region, is because we found them very useful for combating a pan-Arab movement. And we found these sort of like Islamist religious extremist groups like the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, bin Laden connection there. We found them useful for our aims at the time. And so also part of understanding this complex history is not to then go, oh, well, we backed bin Laden, therefore bin Laden must be good or right, or what, it's all our fault or whatever, but to understand the blowback and the potential consequences of some of the things that we have done in this region, and also that Israel has done in this region. Netanyahu is on record saying that he supported Hamas. He wanted to bolster Hamas.
It's the same thing.
Because they were an obstacle to a two-state solution, and he didn't want a two-state solution. So to say all of these things isn't to say, ergo Hamas is good, or ergo it's all Israel's fault that they got, their citizens massacred. It's to understand the history so that we can try to keep people safe and avoid conflicts and avoid terrorism and avoid war in the future. And so I just find the entire moral panic over this bin Laden letter situation to be absurd. Like, on every single level, I find it completely absurd.
It's ridiculous. And the last thing we should mention is that there was originally, from people including myself, speculation that the Beijing-owned app TikTok could be in some ways tweaking with the algorithm to amplify this in the United States. And actually, TikTok saying that they're aggressively banning the content doesn't mean that that wasn't necessarily happening in Beijing. But I don't think it does. I don't think we actually even need TikTok, as the Google data that the Washington Post polled shows. We don't need TikTok. We don't need Instagram. Like the Russian memes from 2016 that they actually did put like $30,000 behind or whatever it was to have some minimal effect. We're trying to prey on these divisions over trans ideology and Black Lives Matter and all of this stuff in the US. Our foreign adversaries know that we are already completely divided along these lines, and they already know how powerful this stuff is. We actually don't need them to pour gasoline on the fire. We certainly shouldn't allow them to pour gasoline on the fire. But even if they do, the fire's already burning. They might make the fire worse, but the fire's already burning because of plenty of the problems that we have on our own. And as of like 10 years ago, people can go read this in the Washington Post, there were CIA textbooks. They were made in like Missouri or Colorado that were encouraging and writing about jihad in Afghanistan that were from madrasas. And as of 10 years ago, they were still circulating. They're from like the 1980s.
Wow.
But, like, that is still a completely, there are still completely real fault lines that stem from this Cold War ideology that are driving the conflicts today, right now. I mean, some of these things are still being driven by them. So we need to be honest about it. And if we aren't, people should expect, the political establishment should expect a whole lot more sentiment exactly like this.
And that is a great point, because a lot of this does come down to cope. That younger generations have a very different view of this conflict.
100%.
And I don't think you can look at the poll, like, none of these social media platforms are so powerful that what they serve you just like instantly brainwashes people into whatever view they're promoting. There is a genuine generational break in the way that people view this conflict between Israel and Palestine. And I think that is attributed to a lot of things. Sagar and I had a conversation about this. I think part of it is that young people didn't grow up in this Cold War era where it was like, these are our friends and that's that. And this sense of like, you know, it being existential that we just back our friends against the bad guys no matter what. And I think it also is attributable to the fact that there is less of a lock on what people are able to see and the media that they're able to consume. There's a lot of reasons, I'm sure, multifaceted, that have led to that, but it's organic. It's very clear in every single poll that comes out. And I don't know that the TikTok algorithm has a whole lot to do with it. Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.